What's happening YouTube? PokePhD here. In today's video, we are going to be having more of a discussion, talking a little bit about the Pokemon market and some of the efficiencies or inefficiencies that we'd be able to identify and take advantage of. Before we get into the meat of the video, please leave a like if you do enjoy it and subscribe if you're not already. We're almost at 300 subscribers, so getting to that would be absolutely fantastic, and I would appreciate any help towards that. So first things first, what kind of started this discussion? I was on Professor Oak's Discord and talking within the chat there, and just had a little bit of a quick and frank discussion about inefficient or efficiency in markets, and in just that, for example, if you look at finance markets, those markets are highly regulated. They are analyzed to a ridiculous degree, to huge amount of computational power in order to kind of, for example, value stocks or value options, something like the Black-Scholes equation, which is used to do exactly that. And it's for this reason it's kind of a tough thing to kind of break into and really kind of make money from those inefficiencies in the market. There's for those who are a little bit more averse to finance generally and quantitative finance, not to say that I am, but I've done a fair bit of reading, and there was always generally this idea that the market itself was kind of like perfectly efficient, in that the price for something fairly reflected its price at that given moment. And this was a hypothesis that was often shared by financiers in the kind of mid to late 20th century, but eventually over time people were kind of able to expose the market to be able to identify inefficiencies in the market from which they were able to kind of take advantage of and make money from it. And I don't think there's any reason why we can't do something similar with Pokemon. And this isn't to say that kind of the most obvious Occam's razor decision that you could make in terms of what you want to invest in or what you want to purchase isn't the best decision. There's no reason why that's not the case. For example, you can look at something like Evolving Skies and the Umbreon VMAX. Saw the Umbreon VMAX going up. The obvious kind of play there is to pick up the most obvious play is like, oh, and this card's going up in price, I'll also pick it up, and you kind of contribute to that price increase, and then other people do the same thing. And if you're lucky that you get in there early, you're going to do really well. But generally, although this can be a good decision a lot of the time, particularly with Pokemon, for example, where things are massively affected by hype. For example, every video that's made on the Umbreon is only going to continue to impact that price going forward. But I don't necessarily think this is the angle that you always want to be approaching things from. I like to be a little bit more analytical in those decisions, and as I said again, if you're just like, oh, I'm going to pick up some Evolving Skies because it's doing well and it's going to do well in the future, you're probably not going to go wrong, so it's probably not a bad decision. At the same time, every day you kind of like second guess what's happening with Evolving Skies and the Umbreon and so on and so forth, but it kind of continues to defy those expectations. So for those who bit the bullet or took the dive, they've been rewarded for it, and absolutely nothing wrong with that if you're happy to sit by that kind of attitude, or by kind of identifying that angle that you want to work from, and that's how you want to kind of pick and choose what you as someone who is potentially interested in investing in Pokemon, that's how you would approach it. But I do appreciate looking at things through a different kind of lens, and in a similar way that those financiers managed to find many ways of identifying inefficiencies in financial markets, there's no reason why you couldn't do something similar with Pokemon. So for those who might not necessarily understand what I mean by inefficiencies, I'm far from an expert on finance. I'm sure you can find a much better explanation online. But to kind of summarize what I mean by inefficiencies is that, for example, you see one motor car company goes up in price, like a Jaguar Land Rover or like a Mercedes or something. So Mercedes goes up. I don't know why I chose a German manufacturer. I'm pretty sure that there are about 2 companies now that basically own all of them at this point. But for example, the price of Mercedes goes up by a certain amount because people are buying cars. But there's maybe the price of BMW doesn't automatically follow that. So then you're like, okay, well, Mercedes has gone up 10% this past week because the government announced this other program that's going to help Mercedes and their cars and so on and so forth. So what you do is you actually invest in BMW, knowing that it's similar to Mercedes and it's likely going to follow a similar path. So you identify there's an efficiency and a difference between those 2 prices. You pick up that BMW stock, and then the BMW eventually kind of matches that price increase that Mercedes had, based on the fact that the whatever news or whatever change that caused the Mercedes price to increase should impact BMW in a similar fashion. That kind of stuff really doesn't happen so much in real life, in so much that these things are pretty much immediate, and that's why a lot of people do say, yeah, this finance markets are very, very efficient markets. But thankfully, we're not talking about that, because that would be absolutely dull for us to continue talking about. We're talking about Pokemon, where there's just so much inefficiency and so much opportunity outside of just kind of reading numbers off a spreadsheet and doing some basic logistical regression in order to, potentially forecast a stock price. So I wanted to give a few examples of what I kind of deem efficiencies with Pokemon, and what I would then deem something inefficient, and maybe find some overlap between the two, and then potentially looking at inefficiencies ourselves in order to make some maybe more left field, or maybe some more interesting and hopefully more rewarding investments. Before obviously getting too much further into that, I just wanted to say, obviously, this is all pretty much speculation. I'm not a financial expert, I'm not a Pokemon expert, so if I do mention anything about any particular product, whatever, or that's just me saying that's something I've looked into, that's potentially something I put money into, doesn't mean you should. I would certainly recommend you do your own research before putting your money anywhere. But anyway, let's quickly talk about it then. So for example, one efficiency in the market, and again, it's probably not going to be like a direct translation to something you'd see in finance, but with Pokemon, for example, would be the kind of the price of booster boxes, or the price of the cards in those boxes around kind of release time. So what usually happens 99% of the time is the box, the latest set, whatever it might be, is released on its release date, of course. And then the same thing with the singles. So the singles are available usually a little bit before, due to build and battle boxes and all that kind of stuff, pre-release stuff. But what happens is they are released, the singles are released, and the price falls for a few weeks until they kind of reach a bottom point, and then from that point on, they effectively continue to rise. Realistically, they're up and down, but if you kind of take that to a much longer length of time, you'll see that they do in fact rise. But the main thing is that, or at least what I would identify as that efficiency, is that there's a kind of understanding amongst most people that the price at the beginning is going to be high, and then it's obviously going to go down. There's going to be a bit of a lull, and then eventually that price is going to increase. And it's kind of why most people say don't buy the singles at the beginning, because at the beginning it's expensive, and then it will go down, and then it will go up again. And obviously the wisest thing you could do would be to pick up the point where you kind of think that the singles are at their lowest price. But the main thing is there's pretty much a consensus that the beginning is the worst time to buy, because things are a little bit overpriced, and then they'll drop because more products will be released. Very, very normal thing, very unexpected thing. It's not something that particularly perplexes the mind, I guess. I would say it's not something that keeps you up at night wondering why the single prices are so expensive at release and why they go down when more and more products is open. But without being too facetious, that seems to be one example of what I'm talking about. This isn't to say that all products and everything like that is going to follow exactly that rule and that pattern, and that's exactly what's going to happen, because that's not always the case. Again, Pokemon is far from being efficient. A lot of these things that happen for some sets might not happen for others, but generally that's kind of the rule that you expect to happen. Where I think you could potentially look at things differently, and as I said, kind of look more towards those inefficiencies, are when, for example, you see a card or a particular single or a booster box from a particular set. There's going to be a correlation between cards within that set potentially, or booster boxes in the same era, the same kind of time frame. However, they don't necessarily, or the price changes don't necessarily happen at the same time, or they don't necessarily happen at the same rate. And to kind of pick this apart a little bit more, I kind of wanted to talk about some examples of cards or boxes, whatever Pokemon product. I'm going to try and be a bit more generic as I continue to talk about it, just so I don't repeat the same things over and over again. But for example, when you look at the price of a newly released product, it goes down and then eventually starts to go back up, but doesn't necessitate that every card, the booster box starts to rise or the single card starts to rise. Doesn't necessitate that they all rise together. What you'll often find is the fact that maybe the most hype card in the set, the most popular card in the set, would be the one that kind of rebounds the fastest and rebounds the most. And again, if you are someone who's able to just kind of pick on that, identify that and say, okay, this is a chase card, you've been kind of following the price, and this is kind of where you think potentially would be the kind of bottom price for that, you're probably not going to go wrong picking up that card at that time in the hopes that the price is going to continue to go up. But what often happens is that happens. That card will rebound, the price goes up, and you may potentially miss out on the opportunity of picking it up at a good price. Sometimes that might not be the case, because, for example, when you look at something like the Umbreon VMAX, that thing just continued to go up and up and up and up. But what can often happen is the price of that card, it rebounds, it goes up, and then there's some amount of delay with similar cards or similar cards from different sets, cards within the same set. Generally, there should be some correlation between that card and other product, whether it be the sealed box, as I said, or as I said, the different single cards. With that, if you're able to identify other products that there is some kind of similarity to, or you believe that there is some correlation to, there's no reason why you cannot jump on these inefficiencies in order to identify things that you think would be a good investment. One kind of big example of this is the Latios and Latios, the team up alt art, the one that looks like the kind of the Valentine's, the love heart. So for example, if you've been keeping an eye on that price for some time, it's been increasing in price for quite some time now. It was probably a couple of years ago that it first started to increase in price, but not at a crazy rate. And then there was a point, I believe, last year where it really jumped up, maybe around about Valentine's. I think it was a bit, not so much a coincidence or a random shake up in price. It was genuinely around about early last year. And then what do you see 6 months later? You see the price of other alt arts from Sun and Moon really start to jump up. And I'm not saying that's just because of the Latias. Clearly there's a lot of hype around alt arts right now, so people are going crazy for the Sword and Shield ones, and then what do you do next once you've done that? But my point really is, these things aren't single faceted. right? So if you're able to identify the Sword and Shield craziness with alt arts, maybe you'd have got in before, with the Sun and Moon before then. And if you missed out and you thought, okay, well, Sword and Shield alt arts are crazy price right now, maybe I should look at Sun and Moon alt arts, and then you look at something like the Latias and you think, yeah, the Latias and Latios, and you think, yeah, that's fantastic, something I might go for. But basically, my point really is, if you're able to, or using trends and things that you've already seen and actual data and information that you've already seen and observed and changes you've seen, you be able to kind of translate those or use those to potentially identify similar things, similar products that might make a similar jump in price or eventually change in price to some extent. Again, these things are not going to be immediate because we're not talking about financial markets, but generally you will see this across the board. And for those who are on the ball enough, those are the kind of plays you really want to be making. I think generally sometimes it's, again, as I mentioned, the obvious play is to really just go for the product that's whatever, stonking at the time, whatever there's a lot of hype around. And a lot of the time that's totally fine. But I think there's just opens up so much opportunity. Just generally the fact that you have this information and knowledge on a specific card or a specific box, you take advantage of that to then find other opportunities in the market. Another example would be Japanese Sun and Moon booster boxes, and this is something I've also mentioned previously. We're at a point now, and I'm not exactly sure on the kind of complete ins and outs and the exact timeline for it, but for example, now you're looking at a box like Dream League, for example, is around about $400, I believe, and something like Tag Bolt might be even more. But what I've also seen at the same time is, alongside that, of course, those boxes jumping up at a ridiculous rate, was the with other boxes within Japanese Sun and Moon that eventually were kind of, I guess, impacted by this, and then eventually started to creep up themselves. Things like Remix Bout, Miracle Twin. And the thing is, if you are not necessarily someone that wants to spend $500 on a Tag Bolt booster box or $400 on a Dream League, what you could do is instead is look for those similar products, right? Something like the Miracle Twin, something like the Remix Bout, and you might be able to pick up 2 or 3 boxes, or maybe just one if it's actually just not having the budget, rather than kind of sitting there and thinking, well, this is something I want to purchase, but it's already too expensive for me. I think it's going to go up just because it's been going up for a while. If you're probably a little bit more tactile and I'm smart with the way you kind of allocate your money, you might be able to say, okay, well, I can't afford this $400 Dream League booster box, but I can afford this $100 Remix Bout booster box or this $150 Miracle Twin box. So what I'll do is actually just buy that instead, knowing that Dream League has moved a certain way, so there's no reason why the Miracle Twin box won't do something similar. Again, not to say this is a perfect science or a perfect art in that these are anything guaranteed. I just think it's something more critical. I think it's more of a understanding of the Pokemon market itself and how one thing changing or one price changing will affect others. And I'm sure I can sit through and give many other examples, and I'm sure there are plenty of examples that I'm overlooking that you could potentially discuss yourself in identifying where these inefficiencies in the market really lie. So that's kind of the crux of what I wanted to discuss. I know it's a bit of I wouldn't say technical video, but a bit more of a heavy video than what you kind of expect from just talking about Pokemon, but certainly something I did want to discuss just because I think it's really interesting itself. sure a lot of people who have kind of dabble in Pokemon, at least from a financial perspective, also dabble in other markets as well. And although for me, Pokemon is obviously a mixture between collecting and then obviously running my store as well, I do like to look at things from a bit more of an analytical perspective, just to maybe see where I can go right, where others are going wrong, for example. So that's probably about it from the video today. As I said, if you can leave a like, if you enjoyed the video anyway, please leave a like and subscribe if you are not already. Appreciate anyone still watching the video, and thank you for your time, and hopefully I'll catch you on the next one.